Welcome back to Blender Frenzy. I'm Justin, back with you in all of my quarantine glory here. But anyway, now we are ready to really actually start stencil painting with our images. In the last video, we fixed our UVs so that we didn't have any stretching with our textures. So let me show you the pictures that we are going to be using. So this one is for the outside faces of our roll, and I purposely took a long strip so that we can lay it out flat, just so that it's much easier to paint. The next one is for the inside cardboard tube. Now this is just a box, but it has these little numbers on there, and usually if you look inside a roll of toilet paper, you see these little numbers inside the tube. So yeah, so this will work because it's flat and easy to paint. And then the next one here is for the top and the bottom ends. Now, don't worry, this isn't mine. I didn't hoard a whole bunch of toilet paper for this. I actually got this picture from Pixabay. I'll leave a link to it in the post if you want to use it. And then the next one I took to use for this crease where the toilet paper roll ends. Now, if you have the means to do this, to take pictures yourself of exactly what you need, that is ideal, of course. But I know not every situation is ideal, and sometimes you only have one or two images to work with, and they don't come from you, they come from other places. But I'll make videos about that kind of workflow later. But since I did actually have the means to get all of the shots that I needed, that is the way I went. So back in Blender here, we are in our Texture Paint Workspace. Let's go to our tool up here and scroll down to where it says texture, and then we want to create a new texture. I'm going to rename this to TP underscore outside. Now this is one of Blender's quirks. There is no way to open up the image here. If I click on the image, it's just this black image here. In every other place where you can select an image, you can open an image. This is just the silliest thing that I can't do it here. So in order to do it, you have to actually come to your Texture Properties tab and make sure you have your TP outside selected. If not, just select it from the drop-down list. But then we want to come down here to open, and then we navigate to our folder and then choose the one we want. All right, now that it's loaded in, we can come back up to our tool and go down here and it should load. Sometimes this is a little glitchy, at least on my computer it doesn't load and it's still black, but it still works. So don't worry too much of what you see here. But now let's just go ahead and start painting on our object. And you can see we have a very, very strange result. Now it shows up in here just fine, but this is all weird. First of all, it's green, and the reason for that is because we still have our green color here for our mix. Now I can change it here in our color picker. I can also change it up here. So I'm going to just change it up here. I'm just going to make this white. And then we fix that if we just paint right over that. But we still have this tiling going on, and that is because our mapping mode here is tiled. If you select the different ones here, you will have different results, of course. Random, and it's really cool to use for like grass textures or things like with patterns like carpet or something. But for our purposes, we want stencil. And after you pick stencil, once you hover your mouse over both of these areas, you can see this little stencil popping up in the corner. Now, it's a little too transparent, and to change that, you would think that you would need to come up here where it says Texture Paint and then Stencil Opacity, just change this up and down. But as you can see, that doesn't change anything. If it's all the way at 1, it's still a little transparent. So I think this used to work for me. I don't know why it doesn't now, but another way to change it is to come down to Cursor and to Texture Opacity, and then change that up, and then you can see now it's more opaque. I'm going to change this to 60% for now. It is still a little glitchy. Sometimes at 60%, it's at 100%. I don't know why. Again, it's just a little glitchy. Just keep fiddling with this until you get it to where you want it. By the way, these options are also up here. So if I scroll with my mouse over this menu, you can see cursor. So you can change it in either spot. To move our stencil, right click and drag. To scale our stencil, it's Shift right click and drag. To rotate our stencil, it's Control right click and drag. Now to reset that rotation, just click inside the angle, type 0, enter, The next thing we have to change is our image is now completely square. So it's a 1:1 aspect ratio, which is not the same aspect ratio of our original image. So just click image aspect, and now we have our original image aspect ratio. With all that done, we can now resize this to how we want it and then start painting. And as we paint on to our object, you can see it over in our UVs, we've painted onto that part of our object. And then we can click and drag our middle mouse button to rotate. Now this rotates around the center of our stencil, which can be good for lining up certain things, but for our purposes, it's really annoying for me. So what you want to do is make sure you have under Edit Preferences, click Navigation and then Orbit Around Selection. And then after you paint, you'll have to tab into Edit Mode and then tab back out. And now it'll orbit around the selection so that it stays right in the center. And then you can move it around a little bit and then just start painting again. The bad part about this is, again, after you paint, you have to tab and then tab again, and then it will orbit like it's supposed to. Paint, paint, paint. Now, as I'm painting, I can move this around, but if I start painting the top and on the inside, it will also paint that texture on the top and the inside of our UV map, and that's not something I want to do. So there's a way to avoid that. I'm going to go to our image. I'm going to reload our placeholder image here. So everything is back to black. And then I'm going to tab into edit mode and make sure just that the outer faces here are selected and nothing else is selected. Then we tab back into texture paint mode and come up here and select this button here. It says face selection masking for painting. And once you do that, you can see, I'm just going to go ahead and disable my cursor here real quick. Anything that we didn't have selected is grayed out. If I toggle that, you can see, and enable our cursor again, and then you can see now our texture opacity is still at 60%. I haven't changed anything, but it looks like it's at 100%. And this is a glitch somehow because as I was recording this tutorial, I had to undo some things, and so I hit undo several times, and that's what happens. I don't know why. It's just really finicky. It's really erratic. So be really careful when you use the undo in texture paint mode, and just be ready for some funky things to start happening. So I'm just going to decrease this opacity down to 8. That's pretty good there. And then once I start painting, now you can see it only paints on the faces that we have selected, which is exactly what we want. So we don't want anything to bleed over into the other stuff. So let's reposition this here again and then start painting. So paint, 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 and then tab, tab, and then we come over here, paint, 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 paint. So to disable the stencil, just come down here to your stencil and click the X. Now that doesn't delete it. If you click the image, it's still there and you can still choose it, but that just disables it for the time being. And now we can look at our object and our image that has been stenciled on there. And we can also zoom in here and take a look at what we have here. Okay, so here's our image here. It's not too bad. You can see we have some stretching going on here. So what I can do is I have a couple options here. Let's find one of the stretching here. Oh, and by the way, this is a little bit too dark here. So what I'm going to do is just like I did in the UV editing workspace. Unfortunately, you have to change the options in each workspace. But solid shading mode and this drop down, we have texture and then flat. And now we can see that a little bit better. Okay, so we have some stretching. Let's just bring our stencil back here and then line it up like we want it, and then just paint over that stretched area. Okay, let's go find another one. That one's all right. Yeah, right here. and just paint. Oh, let's move that down. And we paint over that stretched area. Okay, so let's go ahead and disable this. And yeah, that looks a little bit better. All right, so now we have successfully stencil painted onto our object and unwrapped the texture onto our UV map. So this is one way to do it, and it's okay, but I'm going to do it a different way because I purposely took the picture flat and long, knowing that I was going to lay it out on top of those UVs. So I'm going to go ahead and get my stencil back, my TP outside, and then I'm going to paint on the UV map instead. So let's get this positioned right over here. So, oops. That's what happened last time. I accidentally used the eyedropper. Let's make that white again here. I was wondering how I did that. I think I instead of hitting Shift to resize this, I pressed S. So let me resize my brush here, and now I'm just going to start painting. I'm going to undo that. One thing I forgot to change is the fall off. I actually went this one here. So it's a sharp fall off. There we go. Yeah, something like that. And I don't care that I'm going outside of the UVs. You can paint outside of the UVs as long as they're not overlapping other UVs, which is why I placed these the way I did. And just make sure I got everything in there. All right, perfect. So now I'm just going to disable my stencil. And now you can see, look, we have a nice continuous pattern that is unbroken that goes all the way across and around our object. Ta-da! So the next thing I want to do is lighten this up a little bit. So for that, I'm actually going to create a new brush. So let's just name this brush Paint, the one that we've been using here. And then I'm going to click this button to add a new brush. It's going to create a copy. And then this one I'm going to rename Lighten. All right. So now if I click here, I have two duplicate brushes. And what this is going to do is going to allow me to change the settings of the brush. So then I can just switch back and forth to the different settings and I don't have to change every setting. So for example, like the color, the mix mode, the radius, strength, any of these settings here, I can save in a brush. So for our lighten brush, I'm going to change our color, the value to 0.5, enter. And then the mix mode, I'm going to change that to linear light. Increase our brush here, and if I start painting, you can see nothing happens. And that's because when you use linear light, 0.5 is kind of like 0. Above 0.5, it's going to start lightening things, and below 0.5, it's going to start darkening things. So I'm going to change this to 0.6 instead. And then if I start painting, you can see it is lightening everything under it. Boom. And that is more of the look that I was going for. You can see that much better here. Okay, next thing is the seam. So if we come over here and scroll in, we can see our seam. And if we tab into edit mode, we can see that's where our seam is, that red line. And that's where it split these two ends here. And just to demonstrate that, let's go back to our paint mode and change our brush. I keep accidentally pressing S and it keeps changing my color here. So this is, we want totally white here for our paint mode here. Okay, actually what I want is a red color. So let's change that to red. So let's change that scale. I keep pressing S to scale this down, and it's not S, it's actually F, F like Frank, to scale your cursor in texture paint mode. But Anyway, so let's scale that down a little bit more and then let's paint on there. Oh, nothing's happening. And that is because we are still in paint mask mode with our selection. And if we tab, nothing is selected. So I got to select these again, and then we should be able to start painting. Yeah. And you don't have to do this, by the way. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. But you can see this is our crease. That's where it split those UVs so it could lay it out flat. So I'm going to undo that. So I thought the best way to mask this seam is to use the picture with the toilet paper roll where you could see the crease at the end of the roll. So let's go back to our stencil down here and create a new texture. I'm going to title this one TP underscore crease. Of course, you can title it whatever you want. And then we're going to open up our toilet paper with our crease on it. And move this out here. Let's go back to our tool, down to our reset transform image aspect. And there we go. We're going to rotate this 90. And I'm going to shift to resize that and position it something like this. Okay, so I actually want to create a duplicate brush. So I'm going to click here again and rename this to Paint Soft because I want to change the fall off to a softer fall off. So I'm just going to invert that like that. And then I'm going to change the strength to 0.5 and make sure our color, of course, is white again. Okay, so now I think I'm ready to start painting. And I'm just gonna paint a line down that crease onto our image. Onto our object. Okay, alrighty, and we have something that looks like this. All right, not too bad, not too bad. I might change the top a little bit, actually. I don't want it too dark, but I think the top could use a little bit more. So let's get my stencil back here. And let's just do it right here. See what that looks like. Yeah, that's not too bad. I don't want it to be too dark, so I think that's gonna fit our purposes for now. Maybe a little bit more prominent on the bottom here. Yeah, that's pretty good right there. Okay, let's disable that. And now we're ready to start painting the top and the bottom. So let's create another stencil here. Instead of clicking new here, since I have to go to this tab anyway, I'm going to just come here first, click new, and that way I can just rename it here, TP ends, enter. And then I'm gonna click open, and then of course open our ends. Go back to our active tool, and one thing I did forget to do, I've used the stencil in our Paint Soft. I want to actually go back to our regular paint mode. You can see it still preserved all of the settings that we had, including this red color, which I'll change back to white again. And our stencil here, we want to change that to our ends again. And then I'm just going to reset transform and then image aspect. And we are back to where we want it. 7 to go into top mode and rescale our object here. I'm going to also, if I increase this opacity here, you don't have to use the same one I'm using. If you're using this image, then you can pick any of these. I just picked this one because it had most of the stuff that I wanted on there. Just wanted to let you fill you in on that. Okay, so now we can resize this to where the texture is just bigger than the object. All right, and scale that up and start painting. Nothing happens. Do you know why? It's because we're still in paint mask select mode and the tops and the bottoms aren't actually selected. So since I already have everything lined up here in this view, I'm actually going to come over to the UV editing mode so that I can do my selection. Just going to select the top and the bottoms again, go back into texture paint mode, and now I should be able to paint on the top there. And you can see over on my UV map, it did just that. But I'm going to go ahead and undo this. There is a better way to do this. I can actually paint both of them at the same time. If I come down here to my options and I uncheck occlude and backface culling, now it's going to paint through the mesh onto both of those ends. And there you go. You can see in the UV map, it's painted both of those at the same time. Now, it hasn't painted it perfectly. If you come over here, you can see, well, let's change this here too. So let's go to our material, make sure that our placeholder is selected here so that we can see what we're painting. And you can see the inner tube here is smaller than the actual image, so it bleeds out over onto the top. There's a couple ways we can fix this. The first way is to edit our UVs. So I'm going to uncheck the sync selection and then box select these and just scale that, and I can scale that how I want. I can also use proportional editing tool if I select one of them and turn the proportional editing tool on, and then G to grab, and then we can move those like that. There we go, and now we have something like that. But I'm not going to do it that way. So I'm just going to undo this if it will let me, if it doesn't break on me, do anything too horrendous. Because I just like to keep my UVs as clean as possible. So I'm going to come back here to texture paint mode, and all I'm going to do is just resize it to where the inside tube is just smaller than the objects inside tube, and then just paint around that. And there we go. That has eliminated our outer ring there that was bleeding onto the top. Now you can, of course, come back here and just move this a little bit too. If you do want some of that edge to kind of look like it's still an actual edge, you want some of that bleeding on there, you can do that too. That doesn't look too good. Something like this. And then you can just kind of adjust that like that. And then you can, there it gives you a bit of an illusion of that, having that edge there. I don't care about that. I'm not going to do that. I think it looks a little bit bad in this situation. So I'm just going to reposition that again and then paint that out. Okay, so now while we still have these two unchecked for the occlude, let's go ahead and lighten these because it's a little bit too dark. If you see they don't match. If we disable our stencil here again, the ends are a little darker than the side here, you can see. And we don't really want that. So back into top mode, and that is why we saved our light brush. So lighten, and then let's bring that up here, something like that, and we'll just paint on just like that. And let's see if that's good enough. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Actually, that matches pretty good. Now, of course, if it's not light enough, what you can do is you can either change the settings here to something higher, or you can just do it again and just bring down the strength. So I would, if I wanted to incrementally bring up that lightness, I just put this to 0.2 and then just keep kind of layering it until you get to the point where you like it. Okay, final thing is our inside tube. So I'm going to paint that on the UV map. But I forgot we need to save this. So if we reloaded this right now, it would lose all of our texture paint information. So we want to save a copy. And as you can see, I've done this before, so I'm just going to select this one, press plus to do TP texture 2. And now if for some reason something happens to the placeholder, we still have our image to fall back on. It's a good habit to get into, saving stuff. Speaking of, let's go ahead and save our blend file. Now I'm going to save another iteration as well, plus, there we go, 107. And you can see I've also put underscore stencil paint afterwards. That's just in case I want to know which one the number is. If I go into my vertical list, you can see I have 104 is smooth shading, 105 is UV prep, and 106 and 107 are stencil paint. Okay, last texture here. Let's go to our texture, new, and TP inside. Open up a texture and come over here and enable the thumbnails again. We want this one. All right, so back to our tool. And of course, I forgot to change this before I use that texture stencil. So let's go back to our paint mode, and then we're going to have to select our inside again. Reset transform, image aspect. And we don't see all of our UVs over here. Just make sure our sync is on, and then come back over here. Now we can see all of our UVs. And let's just line this up. I'm just going to line it up to where those UVs are right between those two pieces of tape. And resize my brush and go ahead and start painting. Alrighty. So I think we are done. Well, not really. We have to save this. So save a copy. TP texture 2, I'm just going to save over that. And the reason I'm saving as a copy is so that I can keep my placeholder as kind of a neutral thing to paint stuff onto. So now we have successfully stencil painted images as textures onto our toilet paper roll. And that looks pretty beautiful, if you don't mind me saying. And even if you do mind me saying, it still looks pretty beautiful. Okay, so last thing we can do is come over to our layout. And right now it's using, if we go to Material tab, it's using our placeholder. So if we were to change that placeholder image, if we go back to Texture Paint and we choose Image and then Reload, then everything is now black again. And if we go to our layout, everything is also going to be black. So we want to actually change this to the image that we saved, and good thing we saved an image because we just reloaded that placeholder image. So let's go open and then choose our new texture, and there we go. So what I'm going to do is go back to solid shading mode. Same thing here, come down here, change this to flat, and then texture, and now we can see our wonderful flat shaded toilet paper roll. All right, that's it. So stay tuned and you'll see me in the next one.